Well, thank you, Lesley. Lesley Herzberg,
Yes.
okay, Executive Director of the Berkshire County Historical Society, specifically at Arrowhead, Herman Melville's residence in Pittsfield, Massachusetts.
Right.
Okay. All
Thanks for
right.
having me.
Well, thanks for being with us. Could you just tell me a little bit about how you got involved with the Historical Society and specifically Arrowhead?
Sure. Well, my interest has really been always been Berkshire County history. I came to Berkshire County to actually be a part of the Shaker Museum, Hancock Shaker Village, that's here. So my interest had always been a lot about religious history and American religious history, and specifically the Shakers. So that's how I came to Berkshire County. And so it just followed that when I was looking to move around a little bit in the county, I was interested in, other parts of Berkshire County history and came here and have learned more than I probably ever thought anyone should need to know about Melville.
Yeah.
Um, and as we tell people, very specifically, uh, I am not a Melville scholar, and neither are our tour guides. Though we have some scholars certainly that give tours here, but we want to be clear with people that we're here to educate people about the history of Berkshire County and also about Herman Melville's time in Berkshire County and what he did here at Arrowhead.
Okay. Okay. Where was Herman prior to Pittsfield?
He was in New York City, and he was living with his brother and sister-in-law, and their young child. And Herman and his wife have a baby while they're living in New York City, as well. So it was kind of a nice group of young families to live together. But Herman was writing and felt that he needed a quieter place to write, and had always been partial to the Berkshires. He had spent time here as a child. His uncle had a farm here, which is not too far from Arrowhead, actually, and still exists. It's just a country club now, not a farm, not a working farm. But Herman's mother, after the death of his father in 1832, his mother brought Herman and his siblings out of Albany. They were living in Albany, and they would, there were cholera outbreaks in the city. And so she would bring them to spend time on the farm. And so Herman, in some ways, grew up going, living on a farm and swimming in the lake that's still there, and fell in love with the Berkshires kind of as a boy. So thinking of a place to escape, Pittsfield was the right place for him at the time.
And Pittsfield's not too far from Albany, right?
No, it's about an hour.
Okay, it's just an hour west, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Pittsfield's in western Massachusetts. It borders upstate New York.
Right.
One of the most beautiful areas of the country. I'm in the Midwest, so I'm in western Wisconsin, actually.
Oh, okay.
But I've been to the Berkshires, I've been to Arrowhead, and it is just one of the most beautiful areas of the country, I think.
Yeah, it's especially lovely at this time of year too, into the spring or early summer. I guess it's now the early summer, but yeah.
And the fall too, obviously. It's gorgeous
in the fall, of course.
Yeah. Okay, so what year did Herman Melville move to Pittsfield?
So he moves here in 1850. It's the fall of 1850, actually, and so he moves here, and kind of rashly too. He didn't really consult with anyone else before he bought this property. And he probably paid too much for it, and it was never fully paid off. He had 3 mortgages on it. One of them being held by his father-in-law. So, but he gets here, and, people are always surprised to know that he writes Moby-Dick here instead of, gazing out over the sea. But he really, this particular house appeals to him, and talk about 3 major ways that it appeals to him. So one of them being he needs the space that this house affords. The house was built. Um, it was a very large farmhouse for the time. It was probably built about 1784. And it was built and it was used as an inn or a tavern. So it originally had about 7 bedrooms. And so Herman needs all those rooms because he is moving basically a whole family group here. His oldest brother, Gansevoort, had passed away in 1846. And so that leaves Herman in charge as the second eldest son, in charge of his mother and his unmarried sisters. And so that's who's coming to Arrowhead with him. So we have his mother, Maria, his 3 unmarried sisters, Herman, Lizzie, their young son, Malcolm, who's just a year old, 2 servants, and a farmhand are all living in this house. So and Herman and Lizzie will have 3 more children between the years of 1851 and 1855. So it's a full house here, and he needed that space.
Okay.
Yeah.
Is it known kind of what his relationships were like with his wife and with his mother? And
well, his mother really ruled the roost. She was pretty controlling. So his wife, Lizzie, probably wasn't exceedingly happy to be living with Maria. And they had lived with Maria one other time right after they got married, in Lansingburg, New York, as well. So she probably wasn't thrilled about it. Lizzie was ever supportive of Herman and his pursuits. And, Lizzie and his sister Augusta were his copyists. They worked as copyists for him, and because he had poor eyesight. And so Lizzie and Augusta copied over whole manuscripts. They did a lot of work here. And Lizzie was really the keeper of the finances. Herman wasn't really good with money. Lizzie, doesn't get a lot of credit in some ways, but she was really the backbone of the family, and she kept Herman, kind of working and happy and content, as she raised the children, and she took care of the finances and did all these things for him. So she's kind of an unsung hero in a lot of ways in this house.
And it took care of all the real world stuff.
She did, yeah. So he could kind of sit up in his study and write.
Yeah. So speaking of that, he did write in his study, and where is the study located in the house?
It is. Yep, it's upstairs in the house.
Okay. Is it on the 2nd floor?
It's on the 2nd floor. Yeah, and it's beautiful because it faces his window faces out to Mount Greylock. And so there's a wonderful quote. Nathaniel Hawthorne talks about, how is Herman Melville, he's writing at the time when Herman is writing Moby-Dick, and he's like, Herman gazes out his study window at the grand shape of Greylock. And so we know what he was doing while he was up there. He loved that. He loved the profile of Mount Greylock. And that's what his study faces. So it faces due north.
Okay. And did Mount Greylock, was it an inspiration for the whale Moby-Dick?
Yeah, I mean, it's one of the inspirations.
Yeah.
Melville had obviously been at sea. He had been on a whaling ship. He had been on a merchant ship. He'd been on several whaling ships, actually. And so had seen those whales up close. And then when he gets to Arrowhead, and it's the winter, he sees Mount Greylock covered in snow, and he imagined it kind of as the back of a whale, the back of a sperm whale.
Okay. And so, and was it the Acushnet? Was that one of the ships that he was on?
Yeah, the first ship he was on was called the Acushnet, and the river that runs out of Fairhaven, Massachusetts, and New Bedford is the Acushnet River. But that ship was called the Acushnet, and then he was on the Lucy Ann, and then he was on the Charles and Henry, and finally he was on a naval frigate on the way back to the U.S.
Okay. And that's how he got back to the United States.
that's how he finally got back. Yes.
Okay. Because he did go AWOL. Was it a whaling voyage, or was it a merchant voyage, or?
Yeah, his whaling voyage, and this was common for whale men who were working on whale ships, that they kind of transferred ships. So when he left the Acushnet, he didn't really like the captain, and he went into the jungles in the Marquesas Islands. And then, by the time he had hurt his leg, and by the time he got back out, the Acushnet was gone, but there were other ships in this harbor. And so you sign on to another ship and away you go. And that was quite common. So that's how he gets on this succession of ships. But finally, to get home, he does have to sign up with the Navy to board this U.S. naval frigate called the United States, and takes that from Hawaii and then back to Charlestown, Massachusetts.
Okay. And what year was that?
He gets back in 1844.
1844.
Yeah,
okay, so in his
it's a 3-year voyage. He leaves in January of 1841, and he gets back in like the spring of 1844.
Okay. Was the 41 to 44 voyages, or was that his sailing career? Was that his career on the?
That was his main career, of being time spent on a ship. He had also been on a merchant ship going to Liverpool, England, when he was like 17 years old. That ship was called the St. Lawrence. So he had done that, but that was just a 3-month journey. So not too long, but it really gave him a taste for travel and being at sea. And then he comes back, and at 21, he leaves on the Acushnet.
Okay. And we'll kind of get into some of his writing at Arrowhead, but what were some of the daily things he did at Arrowhead? Well,
there's a great quote about what he's doing. I'm actually going to just grab my page of quotes so I don't misquote him.
Okay.
Because his writing is obviously so iconic, and so I don't want to try to paraphrase and mess it up. But he writes to his editor, he has a pair of editors who are brothers, Everett Dykink, and in December of 1850. So he's just arrived at Arrowhead. He's been there a few months, and he tells him, he says, "Do you want to know how I pass my time? I rise at 8 thereabouts and go to my barn, say good morning to my horse and give him his breakfast. It goes to my heart to give him a cold one, but it can't be helped. Then pay a visit to my cow, cut up a pumpkin or two for her, and stand by to see her eat it. For it's a pleasant sight to see a cow move her jaws. She does it so mildly and with such sanctity." And he goes on there to say that he writes until about 2:30 in the afternoon, or when he finds a good time to stop. He expects not to be interrupted in his study. He wants, if he expects food to be brought up to him on a tray, and then he'll just take the tray whenever he's ready. So like the children, no one's supposed to enter his study. He's really uses it kind of as an oasis. And then here, my other favorite quote is, he says, and he's writing this to Hawthorne actually, in June of 1851. He says, I have been building some shanties of houses connected with the old one, and likewise some shanties of chapters and essays. I have been plowing and sowing and raising and painting and printing and praying. Mm-hmm. So that kind of gives you a little bit of an idea of what he does. If he's not writing, he's working on the house or working on the farm. Okay. He builds the piazza onto his own house.
And can you explain what a piazza is?
Yeah, we say, he called it a piazza, of course. It's just a porch in our modern kind of boring parlance. But it's a porch, which he built onto the north side of the house so that he could look at Mount Greylock. Otherwise, you wouldn't really build a porch to the north because it doesn't get any sunlight. So that was, And
it's somewhat of an expansive porch, isn't it? It's
yeah. I mean, it takes up a good part of the front of the house. So it was important to him for sure.
Okay. And then in the community, did he have a relationship with the Shakers or involvement with the Shakers at all?
He did. He visits the Shakers on numerous occasions, both by himself and with Hawthorne. And both of them actually write about it. Hawthorne wrote at least 2 short stories about the Shakers. Hawthorne was not a huge fan of them. He didn't really understand their way of life. But we also know that they visited them together. At one point when they visited together, it was August of 1851. And Hancock, if anyone has ever been to Hancock, Hancock has this beautiful round stone barn, the only round barn that the Shakers built. And we know that they had a foot race. Hawthorne and Melville had a foot race around the round stone barn at Hancock.
Okay.
Which is
and the barn's not too far from Arrowhead, right?
No, it's not that far. It's across the town, but it's not too far. It's in the same town.
Yeah.
And and then Melville, makes one of the characters in Moby-Dick is a Shaker, which I always find really interesting. Mm-hmm. So one of the people that he finds on, I have to remember the name of the ship, sorry, but his name is Gabriel, first of all. And he is the one that tells the crew of the Pequod that their voyage will not end well. And
Elijah.
Yes, thank you.
Yeah.
And he says, so anyway, I just have always found that very fascinating that he specifically makes this person, calls him out as a Shaker.
Yeah.
And, and this person is something of a prophet, a seer. And, so Melville clearly had this fascination with them and having been exposed to, a lot of different religions and cultures on his travels, I think he was curious about them and was certainly, he was curious and made them into, use them in his story.
Yeah. Yeah. And what were some of the religious beliefs of the Shakers?
So the Shakers are an offshoot of the Quakers. They are a celibate community. We talk about the 3 C's of the Shakers. We talk about celibacy, communal living, and confession of sin. And the Shakers follow the teachings of a woman named Mother Ann Lee. This is actually the 250th anniversary of the Shakers' arrival in America this year. And so they came from England. Mother Ann was a seer herself and certainly was instrumental in creating what, was really a utopia. But what was important about the Shakers is that, and what differentiates them from Quakers or from other utopian societies, is that the Shakers always embrace technology. They were never afraid of technology. They're not the Amish. They're not Mennonites. They always embraced technology, and the work was important for them. The work was a form of worship for the Shakers. So when you have these other utopian societies that failed because people just wanted to sit around and think deep thoughts, that didn't work. And it didn't sustain you. So the Shakers really had it figured out. And I could go on. But I just think it's an interesting way that, the people that lived here interacted with the Shakers and were invited into their villages because the Shakers needed converts. So people were invited to their worship services and were able to see, and they are obviously called Shakers because they danced as a form of worship. And that is how they were really set apart from, they were known as the Shaking Quakers, or just shortened to the Shakers.
Okay. Was building furniture one of their outlets?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, many of their, things that the Shakers are certainly famous for, and their chairs, different furniture, but they were the first to put seeds in individual packets, flat brooms. So they were incredibly industrious, and anything that could ease the work and make it easier, they were great inventors.
Good. Okay. And then to kind of jump ship over to Melville,
Yeah.
what were some of his religious beliefs?
Melville attended the in town. He attended a congregational church. It's probably a combination more of congregational and Episcopal. But we know that the church that he attended here in Pittsfield.
Okay. And did he have a Calvinistic background?
I don't know in particular. I mean, well, let me say his parents were Scotch Irish. So his father was Scotch Irish. His mother was Dutch. So you certainly have Protestant on one side, and then on the other, probably maybe Catholic, but we don't really know.
Okay. Okay. And then you mentioned Hawthorne.
Mm-hmm.
Did Hawthorne visit Arrowhead frequently?
Yes, he did. They so in terms of why Arrowhead, why did he choose Arrowhead? I mentioned that the house was big. He loved that view of Mount Greylock. And then really the third reason was because it put him in close proximity to Hawthorne.
Okay, yeah.
Hawthorne lived here. He was in the Berkshires for only 18 months, so he wasn't here for very long.
Okay.
But he was kind of escaping Salem at the time. He had just published The Scarlet Letter, which was a bit controversial, so he kind of was trying to escape. And he was here in Lenox, Massachusetts, which is just about 10 minutes away from Pittsfield by car. It would have taken them a little bit longer to travel in between, but not too far, in a place called the Little Red Cottage, which is where they stayed. And Hawthorne and Melville met on a hike that was organized by some friends, one of them being David Dudley Field. And so, some other kind of literary luminary friends, and they went up Monument Mountain, which is here in Great Barrington, just a little farther south, and were introduced August 4th of 1850, and really became quite fast friends, very much kindred spirits, I think, and Hawthorne was the more established author between the two, and he's older than Melville. He's 12 years older, and Melville had lost his father at age 12, so he certainly served as something of a father figure and a friend. So they really, Melville wanted to develop that friendship, and so locating himself in Pittsfield was very important, and they visited one another's homes frequently.
Okay. And did Hawthorne have an influence on the writing of Moby-Dick?
Definitely. He was one of the people that saw early drafts. There are some things that we'll never necessarily know, but how much he told him to change Moby-Dick. There are some people that say that he influenced him. Hawthorne influenced Melville and said, that originally Moby-Dick kind of started with this romantic idea of these cannibals, which had been so successful for Melville in his first two novels, Typee and Omoo. And, were these kind of successful travelogues and adventure stories. And so he started Moby-Dick that way as well. And supposedly Hawthorne told him, you've done this already. Like, you need to do something different, and really gave him the idea to, number one, have a more narrative telling. And so introducing the narrative thread of Ahab, and then cutting out, I mean, if you can imagine Moby-Dick being longer than it originally, than it is now, which apparently it was, he had encouraged him to take out some more of the kind of the biological aspects that Melville was fascinated by. His cetology chapter is, kind of famous. People are like, oh, the cetology chapter.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, apparently there was more originally, and Hawthorne had encouraged him to take it out. And, and then Hawthorne, Melville dedicates Moby-Dick to Hawthorne. So, and the only person invited to the publication party for Moby-Dick was Hawthorne.
Okay. So a bit of a father figure, a little bit of hero worship as far as a writer goes.
Right. Yeah, definitely.
Okay. When does he begin? Does he begin writing Moby-Dick at Arrowhead?
It's said that he started writing while he was still in New York City, and that he completes the bulk of it here. However, some people say that he scrapped everything he had already written and started over once he got here. But we don't really know. It's just, I think there are a lot of specific Berkshire references in Moby-Dick. And so, it's hard to know where he started from. But certainly the influence of the Berkshires can be found in a lot of Moby-Dick if you know what to look for.
Okay. And did you say he finished writing frequently at 2:30 p.m.?
Right.
Okay. When did he start?
He started when he says, I go to the barn at about 8.
Yeah.
He's usually then, I think we usually then say, oh, maybe he started writing about 8:30.
Okay.
Yeah.
So about 6 hours, 6 to, okay. All right. And then when does he complete Moby-Dick?
So he completes Moby-Dick in the spring of 1851.
Okay. And he started in the fall of 1850.
Right.
Okay. So actually relatively quickly.
Yeah. I mean, I should say he moves to the Berkshires in the fall of 1850. So however much he'd written up to that point, and whether or not he scrapped it, we don't know. But I think he wrote very quickly by all accounts. Just when you look at how he publishes his first 5 novels and how quick they're in very quick succession.
Okay. Does the Historical Society have manuscripts of Moby-Dick?
We don't have any manuscripts.
Okay.
There really aren't any manuscripts that survive.
Okay.
For Moby-Dick, I should say, specifically.
Okay. Any manuscripts with any of his other novels?
I believe there is a manuscript for Billy Budd.
Okay.
I can't say for the others. I know in terms of our collection, no, but the Berkshire Athenaeum here in Pittsfield, which is a public library, but they have a specific Melville collection, and also the New York Public Library has a large collection of Melville archives.
Okay. And what was his state of mind? How did they describe Melville when he was writing, or when he was finished writing daily after a session of writing Moby-Dick?
Throughout Melville's life, a lot of people have guessed at, did he have some kind of mental illness, inherited perhaps from his father, which is certainly possible. He could go into great periods of melancholy and just general depression, especially when his books were not being well received, which of course Moby-Dick was not. And so in terms of, I think, locking yourself away for 6 hours and just being so focused on your writing, he took time to kind of come out of that artist's mindset. And so when he would emerge, he would often go and speak with Lizzie and tell her about what he'd been writing and, just talk to her. And he would often then take some time to see his children, certainly, and ride into Pittsfield to get his own mail.
Okay.
So that was kind of an outlet for him too. And then, you were at the post office and you got all the town gossip too. So he had like kind of these stages where he would come out of the study and be kind of re-enter the world in a way.
Okay. Yeah. A lot of time in his imagination, and then
Right.
come up to the
Right.
outside world. Do we know what he wrote on? Kind of what pen did he use? What kind of paper or did he use?
Well, he used a quill and ink.
Okay.
Even after typewriters had been invented, he always preferred a quill. He had a few different desks, but he liked to write. The desk that we know he had here is a pretty large table. It's not a desk, it's just a table. And it's pushed up against a window, pushed right up against that window so he could see Mount Greylock. And, paper was expensive. But Melville was selective about the paper that he did use. And we know that he did go and buy his own paper. And if people are familiar with Crane Company, the Crane stationery was made here in Dalton in the Berkshires. So kind of like the next town over is Dalton, Massachusetts, and that's where the Crane paper mills were and still are today. Crane is still around. But we know that Melville would go and get his own paper. And at one point there's a note, and I forget where it is, but he says, I have a whole sleigh full of paper.
Okay. Do we know what he was reading around the time of writing Moby-Dick?
Yes, and I'm not going to be able to quote you actual books, but what I will do is say there's a really wonderful project right now called Melville's Marginalia, and you can look it up, and it'll tell you the books, and it'll tell you what he was writing in his margins, which is pretty fascinating. People talk about Melville writing Moby-Dick with Milton in one hand and the Bible in the other. Again, do we know if that's true? Not really. But, it's possible for sure. We know that he loved Shakespeare. He was very influenced by Shakespeare. And obviously, biblical references abound in Moby-Dick as well. But there's some wonderful things that, if you just go through the list of books and marginalia, and then also the art that he collected. It's called there's a site now called Melville's Print Collection Online, and you can see what kind of art he collected, which is pretty fascinating as well.
And where did he get his? Where did he get his books, and where did he get his art?
I can't speak to that specifically. I think where anybody would really get, purchase their books, but I think going into Boston and going into New York was, these trips that he would go. We know he has this beautiful Persian tile that's here at Arrowhead that he brought back from a trip to the Holy Land in 1860. And we know that he purchased that on the streets in Constantinople.
Okay. Oh, okay. And how long was he over in the Middle East?
He was there. He was only there, let's see. It wasn't much longer than, it wasn't any longer than a year, let's say. We know that he was there at least, he was having kind of one of these bouts of melancholy, and his father-in-law decided to send him off into Europe, and then he continued throughout the Middle East.
Okay. And his long poem Clarel comes out of that experience.
Exactly.
Okay. And so what year did he leave Arrowhead?
He leaves Arrowhead in 1863 with his whole family in tow, and he basically switches houses with his brother Alan. So his brother Alan leaves New York and comes up here and uses Arrowhead mostly as a summer house. And then Herman moves into his brother's home in New York City and lives there for the rest of his life.
Okay. And is that off Park Avenue?
I believe so. I know the address, but I don't know New York well enough to say where it actually, where it is.
Yeah. But there is a plaque there now.
There's a plaque. The house isn't there any longer, but there is a plaque.
Right. And so speaking of the 1860s, did he have any involvement in the Civil War?
He himself did not. He did write a series of poems called Battle Pieces as a reaction to the war. Unfortunately, his son Malcolm, who's his oldest son, did join a militia during that time, and he slept with a gun under his pillow, which probably wasn't the best choice. And in 1868, I believe it's 1868, Malcolm either commits suicide or just accidentally shoots himself, and that's kind of the first blow for Melville in losing his children. And then his son Stanwix, maybe 2 years later, goes out to San Francisco to kind of make his way in the world, and dies out in San Francisco of an illness.
At a relatively young age.
At relatively young ages, yeah.
At Arrowhead, we know he wrote Moby-Dick there. Did he write anything else of significance at Arrowhead?
Yeah, at Arrowhead, he also wrote, so right after he finished Moby-Dick, he wrote Pierre. He wrote Israel Potter. He wrote the Piazza Tales, and the Piazza Tales incorporate some of the short stories that more people are familiar with, like, the Piazza is one of them, but also Bartleby and Benino Sereno. And The Confidence Man was a novel. And then he really doesn't write novels once he leaves Arrowhead. And then the last novel he writes is Billy Budd, but that wasn't published in his lifetime. And he worked on it through the end of his life and never considered it finished. So that was the only time he goes back to kind of novels.
Okay. So the height of his creativity is at Arrowhead.
It really is. I mean, from the time he's here, he arrives here when he's 31 years old, and he's already published his first 5 books, which are really popular. And then it's all downhill from here, unfortunately. Yeah. So, from 31 to 44, and that was the height of his fame.
Okay. And then today, can people tour Arrowhead?
Yes, Arrowhead is open for tours during the summer season. So really Memorial Day till the end of October. You can come for tour, and tours are every hour on the hour from 10 to 3. And you'll have a tour guide, so you can ask questions and engage with someone. So it's not just an audio tour, but a personal tour of the house.
Okay. And I believe at one time, and correct me if I'm wrong, were folks able to rent Melville's room to write in for a period of time? And do you still do that?
We still do that.
Okay.
Yep. It is available to rent Melville's study for an hour or two, to be able to spend time in that room and to be creative in whatever way people choose to be creative. So that certainly is an opportunity that we offer here.
Okay. And do you also have a bookstore or gift shop?
Yep, we have a gift shop, and in Melville's barn, we have rotating exhibits. We have walking trails, nature trails. We have an orchard, which we just planted 3 years ago, hoping to make some cider the way that Melville made his own cider. So we'll be making cider with some heirloom apples, just as Melville did.
Okay. And I think you touched on it. So if someone is going to Pittsfield, is there any other location you would recommend for people to learn about Melville?
Yeah, there are some wonderful sites on our website, which is berkshirehistory.org, or you can go to mobydick.org. There is a Melville Trail. And so along with Arrowhead, you can go to several other sites that Melville himself visited in the area. So places like I've mentioned, Hancock Shaker Village, he visited the Shakers. Monument Mountain, where he met Nathaniel Hawthorne. Tanglewood, which is where Hawthorne's home was. There's a reproduction of his home there now. You can't go in, but there is a reproduction where they certainly would have met. And other places like Mount Greylock. You can go up, hike Mount Greylock, or drive up Mount Greylock. So there's a variety of sites in the Berkshires that you can visit. Those are just some of the highlights, but it's about 13 different sites, and you can see that on our website. It's just under Melville Trail.
Okay. And is it May or September, October you would recommend the times of the year to go for the best experience of the Berkshires in Pittsfield?
Well, I mean, if you like the summer months, the summer months are great, but if you like to see the fall color, certainly early October is the time for that.
Yeah. Like I mentioned in the beginning, one of the most beautiful areas of the country. So yes, highly recommended.
All right. Thanks.
Yeah. Well, Lesley, thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Thank you for taking the time and the interest.
Yes. Well, thank you for all the information on Arrowhead and Melville.
Sure.
All right. Thanks, Lesley.
Sure. Thank you.
All right. Bye.
All right. Bye.